If your car alarm starts blaring at like 3 in the morning just because a single stray autumn leaf touched the windshield, your first thought isn't that the car is under attack by some, highly organized syndicate of foliage.
Right. No, you definitely don't think that.
Yeah, you think the alarm itself is miscalibrated. You think the sensors are dialed up way too high, the system is too touchy, and the siren is basically responding to a completely benign environment as if it were a five-alarm emergency.
Absolutely.
Yet when our own bodies flood with adrenaline, when our hearts hammer against our ribs and our thoughts just race at 100 miles an hour simply because a manager sent us a slightly ambiguous Slack message,
Yeah.
our instinct is rarely that objective.
It's never that objective. We never blame the sensor.
Exactly. We don't look at our internal dashboard and say, my biological alarm system is a bit hypersensitive today. Instead, we immediately conclude that the danger is absolute, or, even worse, that we are fundamentally irreparably broken. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are dismantling the greatest cultural illusion about human anxiety.
And we're doing that by exploring it from the inside out. But to set the parameters right up front, this is not a diagnostic tool.
Right.
We are not providing a medical manual. And if you came here looking for a permanent magical off switch for worry, that simply does not exist.
Yeah, spoiler alert on that one.
Yeah, treating anxiety as a localized disease that just requires eradication is actually a massive part of the misunderstanding we're addressing today. Our goal here is a serious, compassionate, and highly mechanical exploration of what anxiety actually is.
Which is an intensely human condition.
Exactly. It's woven into the deepest architecture of how our nervous systems anticipate risk, process uncertainty, and navigate what is an inherently unpredictable world.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are pulling the blueprint for this from a foundational manuscript that synthesizes, decades of clinical observation, neuroscience, and psychological frameworks.
It's a really comprehensive look.
It really is. We are weaving together the cognitive behavioral foundations of Aaron T. Beck, David H. Rosmarin's work on breaking the cultural stigma, the practical mechanics of panic outlined by David Carbonell, and the acceptance and commitment strategies of John P. Forsyth.
Plus the curiosity-driven neurology discussed by Martha Beck.
Right, and Susan Cain's insights into the highly sensitive mind, along with Mel Robbins' tactical approach to breaking behavioral paralysis. Together, all these perspectives strip away the mystery.
They really do. They reveal this unifying truth that anxiety is not a character flaw. It is a highly intelligible system.
And when a system becomes intelligible, you can actually work with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we connect this to the bigger picture. The word system is the critical pivot point here. Before we even touch the biology of a panic attack or the psychology of an anxious spiral, we have to look at the environment in which this system operates.
Which means we have to address the shame.
The deep, persistent shame attached to it, yeah. The foundational texts make this really striking assertion that anxiety is universally experienced, but society insists we carry it privately.
It's like a secret we're all keeping from each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've engineered this incredibly rigid, deeply false boundary. On one side, you have the cultural default, quote-unquote, normal people who experience stress.
Right.
And on the other side, sequestered away in this clinical-sounding category, you have anxious people.
We treat it as if anxiety were this exotic affliction that only strikes a certain demographic, rather than the baseline tax we all pay for having a prefrontal cortex.
That's a great way to put it, a baseline tax.
Because that boundary implies that having an active internal alarm system makes you a weak driver of your own life. But the sources shatter that binary. Anxiety runs through the very center of ordinary existence.
Oh, everywhere.
Think about a parent lying awake listening for the sound of their teenager's key in the lock. That is anxiety. An entrepreneur launching a product and staring at 0 sales on day 1. Anxiety. Or someone stepping into a new relationship, profoundly aware of how devastating it would be to lose that person.
That is an anxious charge. It's the raw material of human anticipation.
Right.
To be a creature capable of anticipation is to be a creature capable of anxiety. You really cannot sever the two. The evolutionary advantage that brought humans out of the food chain and into civilization is our brain's default mode network.
The simulator.
Yes, our ability to decouple from the present moment, travel forward in time, and run complex simulations of the future. The exact same neurological machinery that allows you to invent a new software platform or, plan for your retirement or compose a symphony.
Is the exact same machinery that allows you to rehearse disaster?
Precisely. We survive by predicting threats before they arrive. The brain does not differentiate between imagining a beautiful future and imagining a catastrophic one. It merely uses its processing power to construct scenarios.
That just reframes the entire experience for me. It's not a malfunction of a weak mind. It is the over-application of our greatest evolutionary tool.
Exactly.
But I want to introduce some highly specific clinical distinctions here because the everyday vocabulary we use actually feeds the confusion. We just kind of throw the words stress, fear, and anxiety into the same bucket.
We do all the time.
But when we separate them out, the mechanics of our internal alarm become so much clearer.
The clinical distinction is paramount because treating anxiety like stress or treating stress like fear pretty much guarantees your coping strategies will fail. Let's isolate stress first.
Okay.
In a neurological and physiological context, stress is an issue of allostatic load. It is the physical and mental response to demands that demonstrably exceed your perceived resources. It is structural pressure.
So it's a math problem, essentially.
Basically, yes. You have a mortgage due, your car transmission just failed, and you have to deliver a major presentation tomorrow. The tangible demands on your time, capital, and energy are mathematically higher than what you possess.
The bridge is carrying more weight than its steel was rated for. That's stress. It's anchored to reality.
Exactly. Now, fear, on the other hand, is entirely kinetic and present. The classic evolutionary psychology example. You are walking in the woods, and a bear steps onto the path.
The threat is not theoretical.
No, it is occupying physical space in front of you. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, just bypasses the logical prefrontal cortex entirely.
It doesn't even ask for permission.
It hijacks the system. It floods your bloodstream with adrenaline,
Yeah.
dilates your pupils to let in more light, and shunts blood away from your digestive organs and into your major muscle groups so you can run.
Which is exactly the biological response required to survive the next 30 seconds.
Right. Now contrast that acute, immediate sympathetic arousal with anxiety. Anxiety is diffuse. It is unmoored from the present moment. It is temporal projection.
Okay, so if fear is the bear on the path.
Fear looks at the bear on the path and reacts. Anxiety sits in a perfectly safe living room and says, what if I go to the woods tomorrow and there's a bear? And what if the bear attacks me? And what if my health insurance doesn't cover the mauled by a bear hospital visit and I lose my house? The bear does not exist. The threat lives entirely in the realm of probability and imagination.
Which totally explains why anxiety is so exhausting. A fear response has a clear beginning, middle, and end. The bear leaves, your parasympathetic nervous system engages, your vagus nerve signals safety, and you calm down.
Your body goes back to baseline.
But if the threat is a projection, if the threat is, what if I am secretly a failure, there is no all-clear signal. You're basically bathing your brain in a low-grade drip of cortisol indefinitely.
Indefinitely. And this is where the cultural idolization of the bulletproof persona does so much damage.
Oh, absolutely.
We look at the stoic CEO, the unflappable leader, the hyper-competent colleague, and we assume their external stillness means they completely lack this internal alarm system.
And then we inherently demonize our own nervous systems by comparing our internal reality to someone else's heavily curated external performance.
Exactly. The research deeply challenges the myth of the naturally fearless human. Much of what society reads as visible confidence is actually just heavily managed, highly operationalized anxiety.
Wait, really? So they are feeling it, they're just working with it?
Oh, absolutely. Many people who appear completely unbothered have simply conditioned themselves to act while their internal alarm is ringing. Or they manage the relentless hum of their anxiety through pathological overpreparation, rigid control of their environments, or even by adopting an aggressive dominant posture to preemptively ward off threats.
So anxiety wears 1,000 different disguises in the modern world.
1,000 different disguises.
David H. Rosmarin introduces a concept in the text that feels almost heretical to a modern listener desperately seeking relief. He argues that anxiety, stripped of the cultural shame and the secondary panic we layer on top of it, can actually enhance your life, like it's purely biological data.
It is a profound corrective to the medicalized view. He argues that when your nervous system dials up its sensitivity, it's sending you an aggressive notification saying, pay attention, something of immense value to you is currently at risk or in flux.
So it's trying to help.
Yes. And if you aren't expending enormous amounts of energy feeling ashamed of the notification, you can actually read the data.
I mean, I understand the theory of treating anxiety as neutral data, but let's pressure test this against the lived experience of the listener.
Okay, let's do it.
If anxiety is just evolutionary anticipation, a helpful data point from our biology, Why does it feel like a profound moral failure when we are in the grip of it? Like, why doesn't an anxiety spike feel like a low battery warning on a laptop?
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
It really would. Why does the visceral immediate reaction always default to, there is something intrinsically wrong with me as a human being?
That reaction stems from a massive collision between our biology and our socialization. Physiologically, the sensations of anxiety, vertigo, a racing heart, shallow breathing, gastrointestinal distress, they are designed to be intolerable.
Because if an alarm system is pleasant, it fails its evolutionary purpose.
Exactly. It's supposed to force you to pay attention by making you deeply uncomfortable. But the psychological interpretation of that discomfort is where the moral failure narrative begins. We live in a society that equates emotional regulation with competence.
Right.
So when your body feels entirely out of your control, you draw the false conclusion that your character is out of control.
Which creates the tragedy of the highly functional anxious person.
Oh, yes.
This is the individual who channels the terror of the alarm into socially rewarded behaviors. They are a valedictorian who studies until 3 a.m., not out of a love for the subject, but out of a paralyzing fear of a B-. They are the employee who never drops a ball, who anticipates every problem in the Q3 forecast. They are the parent who has researched every conceivable choking hazard on the playground.
And society looks at this person and just hands them awards. They are labeled reliable, dedicated, and meticulous.
But internally, the architecture supporting that meticulousness is crumbling.
Completely. They are sprinting on a treadmill just to maintain a baseline feeling of safety. Their perfectionism is not some joyous pursuit of excellence. It is a defensive fortification against the possibility of criticism, rejection, or failure.
They're directing all their cognitive endurance toward hypervigilance and self-surveillance.
Yes, they possess an incredible amount of strength, but endurance alone does not produce freedom. It just produces a very well-defended prison.
Wow, okay, so to understand why that prison feels so inescapable, we have to transition from the sociology of anxiety to the actual mechanics. We need to look under the hood of the alarm system.
This is where we bring in Aaron T. Beck's cognitive model, which is basically the Rosetta Stone for this. Beck fundamentally shifted how we view emotional distress by proving that the mind does not passively record reality like a video camera.
It's an active translation engine.
Right. The raw event does not cause the anxiety. The subjective meaning your brain assigns to the event causes the anxiety.
And Beck's framework maps the anatomy of an anxious spiral with incredible precision. It happens in a predictable sequence, often unfolding in, like, a matter of milliseconds.
Milliseconds, yeah. The sequence initiates with a trigger. Now, triggers are heavily misunderstood in popular culture. They aren't just external events, like receiving an unexpected calendar invite from human resources.
Which is terrifying on its own.
Sure, but triggers are frequently internal. They are rooted in interoception, the brain's perception of sensations inside the body. A slight shift in your breathing pattern, a random flutter in your chest, or a fleeting intrusive thought can act as the catalyst.
The stray leaf touching the windshield. It's objectively harmless, but the sensor registers contact.
The sensor registers contact, which immediately pushes the system into step 2, interpretation. This is the fulcrum on which the entire anxious experience balances.
Okay, what happens here?
The anxious brain does not process ambiguity well. It operates on 2 simultaneous cognitive distortions. First, it aggressively magnifies the probability and severity of danger. Second, it drastically underestimates the individual's capacity to cope with that danger.
So it takes that unexpected calendar invite and just bypasses the possibility of a routine check-in?
Completely bypasses it. It instantly dictates, I am being fired, I will lose my income, I will lose my home, and I will not be able to survive the fallout.
The interpretation is catastrophic and absolute. And because the brain doesn't distinguish between a perceived psychological threat and a physical one, we hit step 3, bodily alarm.
Right. Your prefrontal cortex has just informed your amygdala that your survival is actively compromised, so the sympathetic nervous system initiates a hostile takeover.
The HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, floods the bloodstream with epinephrine and cortisol.
Your heart rate accelerates to push oxygen to your extremities. Your digestion halts because processing lunch is pretty irrelevant if you're about to die.
You start sweating to cool the body down for intense physical exertion.
Your body is magnificently executing a survival protocol for a threat that only exists in your interpretation.
And this physiological shift triggers step 4, narrowed attention. Which makes sense, because when an organism is under threat, panoramic awareness is dangerous. You need absolute focus on the predator.
Yes. The brain utilizes the reticular activating system to filter out all neutral or positive data in your environment. You become hypersensitive, scanning the room, analyzing micro-expressions on your colleagues' faces, monitoring your own pulse.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This narrowed attention phase operates identically to a social media algorithm optimized for engagement. Think about how those platforms work.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
If you pause your scrolling for 3 seconds on a video about an airplane turbulence disaster, the algorithm registers your attention as engagement. It immediately recalibrates your entire feed. Suddenly, you are inundated with aviation accidents, terrifying engine failures, and deep-sea mysteries.
It scrubs your feed of baking tutorials and comedy sketches.
Exactly. It creates a synthetic reality where the entire world is falling out of the sky.
What's fascinating here is that your nervous system is the original algorithm. Once your brain clicks on a threat, it aggressively curates your internal and external reality to validate that threat,
It filters out the 12 colleagues who smiled at you and hyper-focuses on the one who looked distracted.
which leads directly to step 5, memory retrieval. To confirm the danger, the hippocampus reaches into your neurological archives and retrieves every piece of historical data that aligns with your current fear.
Oh.
It pulls up every past humiliation, every time you stumbled over your words, every time someone let you down. It populates your conscious mind with irrefutable proof that the disaster you are anticipating is essentially inevitable.
So the algorithm serves up a personalized playlist of your worst moments, perfectly timed to destroy your confidence. Which brings us to the final step in Beck's sequence: behavior.
Yes, the sheer physical and psychological weight of this internal storm demands an outlet. To stop the overwhelming flood of cortisol, the human organism takes action. We seek reassurance. We attempt to micromanage the environment. We over-prepare, or most commonly, we simply flee.
But before we analyze those behavioral reactions, we must examine the absolute extreme of this bodily alarm phase, because the sources separate generalized anxiety from the specific architecture of a panic attack.
Yes, this is a crucial distinction. Panic is not simply a high volume of anxiety, it is a biological paradox.
A paradox how?
Well, during a panic attack, your body performs an astonishing feat of emergency readiness. But because you are sitting in a conference room or a grocery store aisle, because there is no tangible, kinetic threat to fight or flee from, the conscious mind misinterprets the physical symptoms of survival as the emergency itself.
Ah, so the logic loops back on itself.
Exactly. The mind registers the 140 beat per minute heart rate, the shortness of breath, and the numbness in the fingers, which, by the way, is just respiratory alkalosis from breathing too quickly,
Right.
and determines my body is failing. I'm having a heart attack. I'm losing my mind.
So the alarm system itself becomes the feared object.
Yes. David Carbonell's insights into panic are really revelatory here. He points out the tragic irony of the instinct to fight the panic. The natural human response to a panic attack is to try and forcefully seize control of the body. You command yourself to calm down. You try to suppress the shaking.
Because it's terrifying.
It is. But neurobiologically, treating the panic as a threat simply validates the amygdala's initial assessment. By fighting the physical symptoms, you are signaling to your brain, yes, this sensation is incredibly dangerous. We must fight it.
Which dumps a fresh wave of adrenaline into a system that is already saturated.
You're just fueling the fire.
You are trying to put out a grease fire with a bucket of water. The harder you try, the harder you fight the alarm, the louder the siren screams.
That's Carbonell's rule.
Yeah.
The harder I try, the worse it gets.
But panic has a quieter, perhaps more insidious sibling, which the text categorizes as dread. If panic is an acute physiological thunderstorm, dread is a relentless, low-pressure weather system.
Dread is atmospheric. It is an existential weight, a slow burn apprehension of approaching ruin. You often cannot articulate exactly what the ruin will look like.
Right.
It lacks the sharp focus of fear or the hyper-arousal of panic. Instead, it occupies the emotional space of an event long before the event actually arrives. It's the feeling of walking on ice that you know is going to crack, but you don't know when.
And what makes this entire cognitive loop so difficult to break is that the anxiety system isn't hallucinating entirely fictional concepts. It builds its terrifying architecture out of genuine human vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Bodies do get sick. Layoffs do happen. Relationships do end in profound heartbreak.
The anxious mind doesn't invent a fantasy universe. It just fundamentally miscalculates the probability of disaster and assumes it has zero resilience to handle it.
It blurs the vital distinction between possibility and inevitability. Yes, it is biologically possible you could develop a rare illness. The anxious mind processes that possibility as a guaranteed outcome.
And because the human brain cannot tolerate sitting in a state of guaranteed disaster, we deploy strategies to engineer our way out of the feeling. But the sources reveal a devastating twist regarding our coping mechanisms.
This is the tragic part.
Our two most instinctual strategies for fixing anxiety are the exact mechanisms reinforcing the cage. We rely on worry and avoidance. Let's deconstruct worry first, because culturally we actually reward it. We treat worry as a virtue.
We really do. The text provides a brilliant definition. Worry is anxiety at high volume in thought. To the person experiencing it, worry feels intensely productive.
Right. It masquerades as responsible preparation, risk management, and rigorous problem solving.
But underneath the surface, worry is actually a frantic attempt to purchase certainty using thought as currency.
And certainty is not for sale.
It's not. Worry persists as a habit because it provides the brain with three deeply seductive yet entirely hollow rewards. The primary reward is the illusion of control.
Because human beings have a profoundly low tolerance for helplessness.
Exactly. When faced with an uncertain future, sitting quietly with the unknown feels dangerous. The mind begins to spin scenarios, analyzing the problem from 400 angles, convinced that if it just thinks hard enough, it can preempt any surprise.
The cognitive spinning feels like physical action. Worry serves as an emotional substitute for actual, tangible control.
It's the mental equivalent of repeatedly pushing the elevator button. It does absolutely nothing to make the car arrive faster, but the physical action gives you the illusion of agency.
That is so true. What is the second false reward?
It functions as an emotional shield. This is a highly counterintuitive mechanism. Anxious individuals frequently use intellectual worry to postpone direct, visceral feeling.
Well, how does that work?
Instead of allowing themselves to actually feel the raw grief of a potential loss or process the physical vulnerability of uncertainty in their nervous system, they retreat upward into the cognitive space of their minds.
They try to outrun a raw emotion by intellectualizing it,
Right. They analyze the mechanics of the threat to avoid feeling the fear of it.
preferring the headache of overthinking to the heartbreak of vulnerability.
Exactly. And the third reward anchors it into their identity.
The moral aura of being responsible.
Yes. Chronic worriers often hold a deeply internalized belief that their vigilance is the only barrier keeping disaster at bay. They equate worrying with caring.
So if they were to stop agonizing over their child's safety or their company's quarterly earnings, they would feel negligent. They treat their own mental exhaustion as proof of their dedication.
Which is an exhausting way to live.
Which brings us to the second false protector, a behavioral strategy that is even more deceptive than worry: avoidance.
Yes.
The text frames avoidance as the ultimate tragic bargain. It's so powerful because, unlike worry, avoidance actually works.
But it only works for about 60 seconds.
Right.
The immediate neurological reward of avoidance is immense. Imagine you have severe anxiety regarding public speaking. You are scheduled to give a presentation. For a week, your cortisol levels have been spiking. You walk into the building, your heart is hammering, you feel nauseous.
Typical panic response.
Right. 5 minutes before you are called to the podium, you claim to have a migraine and you leave the building. The moment the doors close behind you, your brain experiences a massive release of dopamine and GABA. You feel an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of relief.
The pressure valve opens. You survive.
You survive, but you have just taught your nervous system a catastrophic lesson. By fleeing the presentation and experiencing that profound relief, you have provided your amygdala with definitive proof that the conference room actually was a lethal environment, and that your strategy of escape is the only reason you are still alive.
So you have negatively reinforced the fear.
Precisely. The next time you are asked to speak, the biological alarm will trigger faster, louder, and with more severity, demanding that you deploy the life-saving tactic of avoidance again. You are purchasing comfort in the present at the cost of exponentially greater terror in the future.
John P. Forsythe's framework on acceptance and commitment directly addresses the fallout of this bargain. He points out a grim mathematical reality. A life reorganized entirely around safety inevitably shrinks.
The perimeter of your world contracts.
Yeah.
First, you avoid the large presentation. To maintain that safety, your brain demands you avoid speaking up in small department meetings. Then, one-on-one interactions with superiors become intolerable.
It just spreads.
Eventually, the anxiety migrates to the commute to the office itself. You end up bending the entirety of your existence, your career, and your relationships around fear prevention. The world becomes highly controlled, meticulously defended, but stripped of all vitality.
And avoidance is a chameleon. It doesn't always look like bolting for the exit. It hides in socially acceptable behaviors.
Oh, absolutely. Perfectionism is a highly aggressive form of avoidance. You spend 14 hours polishing a spreadsheet that required 2 hours of work, not to make it beautiful, but to entirely avoid the possibility of a supervisor finding a typo and criticizing you.
Or procrastination. Procrastination is just avoiding the anxiety associated with beginning a difficult task.
People-pleasing is avoiding the discomfort of interpersonal conflict by abandoning your own boundaries. Even over-researching a problem online is an attempt to avoid the raw experience of not knowing the answer.
So, what does this all mean? If I avoid a dark, deserted alley at night, that's just smart survival. But if I avoid a networking event, it's a tragic bargain. How is the listener supposed to distinguish between healthy prudence and anxious captivity?
That's the critical nuance for anyone trying to navigate their own decision-making. The diagnostic difference lies in the concept of intolerance of uncertainty.
Okay, break that down.
The alleyway involves a tangible physical threat. The probability of actual physical danger is elevated. That is healthy prudence. The networking event, however, involves an intolerance of the mere possibility of emotional discomfort. The clearest illustration of this mechanism is health anxiety. Health anxiety perfectly demonstrates how the pursuit of certainty creates the cage.
Health anxiety amplified by the entire internet serving as a deeply unqualified medical consultant.
Imagine you notice a benign, persistent twitch in your forearm. A functionally prudent response acknowledges the data without catastrophic interpretation. That's unusual. I will monitor it, and if it continues for a week, I will schedule an appointment with my physician.
But an anxious response, driven by an absolute intolerance of uncertainty, demands immediate resolution.
Yes, you cannot tolerate the gap between noticing the twitch and knowing its exact cause.
So you bypass the doctor and consult the search engine.
You spend 4 hours scrolling through medical forums. You cross-reference your twitch with degenerative neurological diseases. You begin physically testing your grip strength. You are frantically trying to purchase certainty.
But the internet cannot diagnose you. It can only offer an expanding menu of terrifying possibilities.
This behavior doesn't resolve the uncertainty. It captures your attention completely, forces your body into an extended state of hyperarousal, and validates the alarm system's belief that you are in mortal peril. You didn't cure the anxiety, you fed it.
You essentially poured gasoline on the dashboard of the car while the alarm was blaring. And this highlights a terrifying truth about the architecture of avoidance. When we build this invisible cage of protective behaviors, it doesn't sit empty.
It does not. Anxiety demands an object of focus. It is highly migratory. It attaches itself to whatever domain of your life currently holds the highest emotional stakes.
It's like anxiety is a hermit crab. When it outgrows one shell, it just scuttles over and occupies another. We spend our lives fighting the shells, completely ignoring the crab.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It is nomadic. It will migrate seamlessly between your career, your financial stability, your romantic relationships, your health, and your parenting. If you manage to completely resolve your anxiety about an upcoming financial audit, the brain doesn't necessarily power down the alarm.
It just finds something else.
It simply scuttles over and attaches the exact same level of hypervigilance to a slight cough your child developed that morning.
We have to explore social anxiety in this context because the sources reframe it in a way that shatters the stereotype. The cultural assumption is that socially anxious people are misanthropic, that they avoid social gatherings because they dislike people or prefer isolation. But the psychological reality is often the exact inverse.
It is a deeply heartbreaking paradox. The feared object in social anxiety is almost always the very thing the individual desires most fundamentally. Connection, belonging, and acceptance.
They are not avoiding people out of disdain.
No, they are avoiding the agonizing, perceived inevitability of being evaluated, found deficient, and subsequently ostracized. The core illusion of social anxiety is the belief that the social environment is a high-stakes tribunal and that everyone else is serving as a hypercritical judge.
It's the spotlight effect magnified to a debilitating degree. You walk into a room and your brain convinces you that every single person noticed that you slightly stumbled over the threshold, that your jacket doesn't fit perfectly, and that your opening joke landed flat. You assume you are the focal point of everyone's critical attention.
When the liberating reality of human nature is that almost everyone is entirely self-absorbed. The socially anxious mind projects its own brutal internal self-consciousness onto the external world. They assume the room is scrutinizing them, when in fact the room is mostly full of people worrying about how they themselves are being perceived.
Susan Cain's research is vital here. We have to draw a hard, bright line between introversion and social anxiety because the corporate and educational worlds constantly conflate the two, and it leads to massive misunderstandings of human temperament.
Cain draws the distinction with absolute clarity. She states that shyness, or social anxiety, is fundamentally about the fear of social judgment. Introversion has absolutely nothing to do with fear.
It's about energy, right?
Yes. Introversion is a biological mechanism concerning how your nervous system processes external stimulation and where it draws its energy. It is rooted in how your brain responds to dopamine versus acetylcholine.
So, an extrovert has a nervous system that requires high levels of external stimuli noise, social interaction, novel environments to feel energized. An introvert's nervous system reaches optimal arousal much faster, and excess stimuli becomes exhausting.
Exactly. So an introvert might leave a crowded networking event after an hour, not because they are terrified of the people in the room or because they fear judgment, but simply because their neurological battery for processing sensory data is empty. They need a low-stimulation environment to recharge.
But a socially anxious person, conversely, might force themselves to stay at the event for 4 hours, but they will spend the entire duration in physiological agony, meticulously monitoring their posture, their eye contact, and their word choice to prevent a perceived social failure.
You can be a deeply introverted person with zero social anxiety.
Yeah.
And you can be a highly extroverted person who thrives on being around people, but who is paralyzed by severe social anxiety. The danger lies in pathologizing a quiet temperament. Just because an individual requires solitude to function optimally does not mean their alarm system is broken.
Which brings us to a broader extrapolation regarding the sensitive mind in the 21st century. If we apply Cain's insights to the modern built environment, the baseline level of societal anxiety makes complete sense. We have constructed a world that serves as an engine for chronic overstimulation.
Oh, without a doubt.
Open-plan offices where visual and acoustic privacy are eliminated, endless streams of push notifications, a digital culture that demands constant performative visibility and immediate responsiveness.
For a highly sensitive nervous system, an individual who processes sensory input deeply, who naturally attunes to subtle shifts in tone and environment, modern life is an assault. They become rapidly saturated.
And because our culture idolizes the highly stimulated, invulnerable extrovert, the sensitive person misinterprets their biological exhaustion as psychological fragility.
They sit in the chaotic open-plan office, feel their heart rate elevate and their focus shatter, and they conclude, I must have an anxiety disorder. When the reality is, they possess a finely tuned nervous system that is profoundly mismatched with a brutal environment.
It is the equivalent of taking a beautifully crafted acoustic guitar, placing it next to the speaker stack at a heavy metal concert, and then diagnosing the guitar as defective because the strings are vibrating uncontrollably.
You don't blame the instrument.
Exactly. You recognize the physics of the environment. But even with that awareness, the anxiety still migrates. Even if you understand your sensory limits, the mind still searches for targets.
This raises an important question.
Does solving the external problem ever actually resolve the internal anxiety? If I finally get the promotion or save the specific amount of money or get the clean bill of health, does the car alarm finally turn off?
The foundational texts are unanimous on this point. No. Resolving the external trigger provides temporary relief, but it does not dismantle the architecture of the anxiety. Because the true fuel of the anxious mind is not the specific topic. The fuel is not money or health or social standing.
So what is it?
The primary fuel is the intolerance of uncertainty itself. As long as your nervous system demands absolute guaranteed safety in a universe that is inherently unpredictable, the migrating anxiety will always find a new target.
So if manipulating our environment doesn't work, and if our instinctual strategies of worry and avoidance only reinforce the cage, how do we actually live? How do we disarm the alarm?
The final synthesis of these manuscripts offers a profound and incredibly challenging philosophical shift. It requires abandoning the most common strategy of all. We have to stop going to war with our own nervous systems.
Because the war metaphor is the default human response to anxiety. You feel the panic rising, and you declare martial law on your own body. You say, I must crush this fear. I will not allow this thought. I command my heart to slow down.
But attempting to violently suppress an alarm system creates a catastrophic secondary emergency.
You essentially double the threat level.
You do. You no longer merely have the original anxiety about the upcoming flight or the medical test. You've now generated intense anxiety about the fact that you were experiencing anxiety.
You become enraged with yourself for feeling afraid.
You deploy constant internal surveillance, acting as an armed guard against your own physiological sensations. This internal conflict mathematically multiplies the duration and intensity of the struggle.
John P. Forsyth's framework of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, provides the alternative, but we need to radically redefine the word acceptance. Because in popular culture, acceptance is a passive, defeatist word.
Right. People hear acceptance and they think it means rolling over, surrendering to the panic attack, and letting it dictate the rest of their lives.
But in a clinical and psychological context, acceptance is an active, fiercely courageous posture. Acceptance is not passive surrender. Acceptance means allowing reality to be reality long enough for you to respond to it with skill, rather than reacting to it with panic.
Forsyth's core tenet is anxiety is not your problem. Your struggle with anxiety is.
So, practically, if you are sitting in a meeting and you feel the sudden rush of heat in your chest and the narrowing of your vision, acceptance isn't pretending you enjoy it.
No, definitely not.
It is shifting your internal monologue from, this cannot be happening, I have to stop this immediately, everyone can see I'm losing my mind, to a statement of objective observation. I notice that my heart rate is currently accelerating. My sympathetic nervous system has been activated.
You drop the violent resistance to the present moment. You drop the resistance, which preserves the cognitive bandwidth you would have otherwise wasted on fighting the sensation. And once you have that bandwidth, you can deploy the smaller, actionable techniques detailed by the other authors. Martha Beck introduces a neurological disruptor to the anxiety loop: curiosity.
Curiosity feels like a lightweight word, but she positions it as a structural countermeasure. She writes, curiosity then leads us to creativity. How does curiosity mechanically disrupt panic?
Anxiety and panic rely on rigid, tunnel vision certainty. The anxious mind is absolutely certain a disaster is occurring. Curiosity introduces cognitive flexibility. When you shift from a posture of terror like, this is going to kill me, to a posture of clinical interest, isn't it fascinating how my body is currently constricting my breathing? I wonder where exactly in my chest the tension is highest. You are recruiting different areas of the brain.
You pull energy away from the amygdala and force the prefrontal cortex to engage in observation.
You transition from being the helpless victim of the alarm to being the lead scientist studying the alarm.
It creates psychological distance. And then Mel Robbins approaches it from a purely behavioral angle. She operates on the premise that you often cannot think your way out of a feeling, but you can act your way into a new one.
Yes, she notes, you can't control your feelings, but you can always choose your actions. The anxious loop causes a freeze response. You get trapped in the abstraction of what might happen.
So Robbins introduces a micro-prompt to break the catastrophizing momentum. What if it all works out?
This is not intended as toxic delusional positivity. It is simply a temporary wedge to interrupt the algorithm of disaster long enough for you to initiate physical momentum. Because the moment you take a physical step, sending the email, walking out the front door, speaking the first sentence of the presentation, you transition from the realm of paralyzing imagination back into tangible reality. Movement breaks the freeze.
And what determines the direction of that movement? This is where the concept of values comes in, which might be the most beautiful insight in the entire deep dive. Fear dictates the parameters of your life until you locate something that you value more than you fear the discomfort.
Values provide the nervous system with competition. Let's return to the fear of flying. An individual with severe aviophobia will naturally avoid airplanes. But suppose their daughter is getting married on the opposite side of the country. The individual possesses a core value of being a deeply present, loving, and supportive parent. That value is placed in direct competition with the fear of the airplane.
When the desire to honor the value exceeds the desire to avoid the panic, the individual gets on the plane.
And the crucial detail is, they are still terrified on the flight. The value doesn't cure the anxiety.
They grip the armrests for 5 hours. But the anxiety is no longer the dictator of their behavior. It is relegated to the passenger seat. The value is driving the car.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to pause and challenge this because mapping this out intellectually is one thing. But I am picturing the listener who is intimately familiar with the sheer physical terror of a panic attack.
It's terrifying.
When the walls are closing in, when your vision is spotting and your chest feels bound in iron wire, suggesting they simply get curious about the sensation or focus on their values feels almost mathematically impossible. It sounds like telling someone who is drowning to study the fluid dynamics of the water. How does a normal person actually build the bridge between the overwhelming physiological reality of panic and this enlightened state of detached observation?
It is the most difficult transition to make, and the key is that you do not attempt to make it all at once during a 5-alarm panic attack. You do not leap from being controlled by terror to being a Zen master of acceptance in one afternoon.
So what do you do?
You build the bridge using a methodology of exposure courage in small units.
Courage in small units,
Oh, right.
shrinking the timeline of tolerance.
It is intensely granular work. It is not about grand, sweeping transformations. It means writing the terrifying email, reading it only twice instead of 10 times, and hitting send while your hands are shaking.
Right.
It means when you are at a social gathering and you feel the overpowering urge to flee, you look at your watch and commit. I will not run. I will stay in this room for exactly 60 more seconds. I will tolerate the discomfort for 1 minute. Then I'm allowed to leave. It means feeling the desperate compulsion to ask your partner for reassurance for the 5th time today, and choosing to sit in the agonizing silence of uncertainty for 5 minutes before you speak.
You are microdosing the uncertainty. You are slowly, deliberately teaching your nervous system that the alarm is miscalibrated. You are generating empirical evidence for your brain that you are capable of surviving the biological discomfort without resorting to avoidance or catastrophic worry.
Neuroplasticity works in both directions. Just as avoidance strengthens the fear pathways, deliberately tolerating small units of discomfort rewires the brain toward resilience. Over time, the 60 seconds of tolerance becomes 5 minutes. The unreviewed email becomes a standard workflow. You are no longer trying to eliminate the anxiety. You are simply expanding your capacity to carry it while moving toward the things you value.
Synthesizing everything we have covered today, from the biological foundations to the behavioral traps, what is the paradigm shift we want the listener to walk away with?
The profound shift is recognizing that anxiety is an intelligible, well-intentioned, entirely natural protective system. It is your biology attempting to keep you safe in a world of infinite variables. It's just doing so with a clumsy, heavy hand.
For years, the cultural narrative may have convinced you that this internal alarm was a source of shame, proof of your inadequacy.
But when you strip away the shame, you realize the machinery isn't broken. You can stop fighting a war against your own mind. You can begin to construct a workable, meaningful life where absolute emotional comfort is no longer a strict prerequisite for taking action. You do not have to wait until the fear vanishes to start living.
You can drive the car even if you know the alarm might occasionally go off over a falling leaf. As we close this deep dive, there is one final observation that emerged from the research on how deeply anxiety is tethered to our anticipation of the future. The sources establish that anxiety is the shadow side of the default mode network, our brain's ability to decouple from the present and simulate the unknown. It is the engine of our most paralyzing what-ifs.
Yeah.
But consider this. If the exact same neurological mechanism that causes our deepest dread and our midnight spirals is the very machinery responsible for human hope, for our creativity, and for our ability to dream of a better reality, is it possible that a mind completely incapable of experiencing anxiety would also be a mind completely incapable of imagining a beautiful future?
It is the price of admission for imagination.
Something for you to ponder on your own. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, your nervous system is not a defect. It is an overeager protector scanning the horizon on your behalf. It doesn't need your hatred, and it certainly doesn't need your shame.
It just needs your understanding and perhaps a little bit of grace.